My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
I didn't even smile. To get pictures. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I think sometimes after the film, it's good to have a couple minutes just to kind of take a couple deep breaths and breathe. I'm Alice Forrester. I'm the CEO at Clifford Beer's Clinic in New Haven. And frankly, I'm not very familiar with Hartford the way everyone in this room is. So I'm honored to ask to moderate the panel, but I'm really looking to you all for what your thoughts are and where we're going to go. Did the film hit anybody in a place of truth or emotion or thought? Yeah. What were your thoughts? Any?
Several of us were talking about wanting to take the test like now.
Oh yeah.
I found the link.
Yeah.
But I work with youth in Hartford Middle School, and I'm just thinking about, I was talking before that we identify probably 1 or 2 a year out of 30 who articulate something to us that without necessarily us asking. And my thought is if we were actually asking, it would be 80 or 90% that have some level of an adverse ACEs score, and that we should be asking.
Yeah, in New Haven, we started working. We have a project called the New Haven Trauma Coalition, and we're in about 12 schools. But we started to ask, actually, not whole schools, but the classrooms principals are having the most difficult time with, and we're finding the range between 38 and 59% of the kids have active PTSD. So it's not even an ACE score, which is just, did this happen to you? But we're talking clinical PTSD. So, and I love in the film that little girl in the corner who's so quiet, in the part around the little classroom. And, those are the kids that are scoring high too, right? You kind of expect the kids who are, causing some ruckus in the back as being high, but we're really, it's important. But, someone out of Washington State told me early on when we started with the coalition, don't bother screening everybody. Just know it's high, right? Just know that the ACE scores are going to be high and do something, right? And so, it's one thing to screen the kids, but one of the things in New Haven we're doing is we're offering CBITS, and I know you guys are doing it up here in Hartford too, which is a trauma-informed group curriculum for kids in classrooms. It's designed for kids in schools, and we're finding as we're doing the work in the classroom with CBITS, the kids' attendance improves. A lot of them have 30, 40 days out. The attendance improves 15 to 20 days. Their grades are going up. They're not like A's and B's, but they're not F's. They're moving in the right direction, and their clinical symptomology goes down. Right? So, it's not rocket science. It's like you ask, and then you have something that you can do. And then the other area in New Haven that we're working on very strongly, as you saw in the film, Laura, who works at our organization, is the in-home parent work and addressing the social determinants of health. And the social determinants are rent, food, safety, right? Which are really hard. Pediatricians can't do it because they don't have anyone to go home and do it. You heard Dr. Burke, she's trying to gain that. Schools can't do it. I mean, they could send the truancy officer home, but they're not going to be able to sort of re-find housing. So addressing the social determinants is really a critical component of what we're trying to do in New Haven also. I just asked for one or another comment about the film. Anyone have anything? So I really appreciate you listening. I feel like we're proselytizing always in New Haven at Clifford Beers. We serve about 6,000 kids a year, and the enormity of kids who have been exposed to trauma or adversity or stress, as a lot of folks in our community like to call it, is very high. But it took us, it wasn't until 2005 that we actually started to ask the kids and score the kids and ask about the trauma, right? So you can treat depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, but you really need to be able to ask what happened to you and understand what's happening to you. It's not just happened, it's happening. So we're going to have a panel. We don't have a lot of time today, but I wanted to introduce everyone, and they're not in order in terms of, well, actually, I'll start. So Trudi Lebron, is that how you say it? Yep, is the founder and director of Scriptflip. Can you talk for a second on what is Scriptflip?
Sure. So Scriptflip is a consulting and training firm that I founded about 5 years ago now. We started by providing professional development for teachers and youth development workers around youth development and trauma and de-escalation strategies. And we've really moved since then to really providing more in-depth coaching for people who are working with youth to really understand how to create environments that promote some of these kinds of resilience factors that we saw here in the film.
Well, that's great. It's great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Dr. Sandy Chafouleas is right next to her, and she is a distinguished professor from UConn in the Neag School of Education, and she's the co-director of the Collaboratory on School and Child Health at the University of Connecticut. And full disclosure, I met Sandy in the bathroom after going to 3 different trauma conferences, and I said, well, I see you all here all the time, why are you here? And we've developed a friendship from that, and Sandy has really dedicated, I think, her professional career to get people to integrate the trauma work into the schools. So you're not allowed to say anything else other than our bathroom
was fine. I think that was fine.
Good. And we have Catherine Corto-Mergins, who is the Director of Training at the Village Collaborative Trauma Center. She's an MDFT trainer and consultant for the Village of Children and Families. And Catherine is also a recipient of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network grant and doing work in the Hartford schools, which is very exciting, and I hope she'll talk about. Great. And Brother Kelvin Lovejoy, very nice to meet you. He is a youth and community advocate and a student minister at the Muhammad Mosque, number 14. He has a degree in human services from Springfield College, which is a great college. Well, go Springfield. And we have Timothy Goodwin, who's the executive director of Hartford City Mission and founder of the Community First School. And he and I got to know each other a little bit talking this week, and he's incredibly sensitive and understanding of what is ACEs. So it's great to meet you.
Thank you.
Good. So I have some suggested questions, and hopefully if we can get through the questions, maybe we can have a few minutes for community conversation. So I guess the first question is, what does it really mean to be a trauma-informed community? Like, it sounds buzzy, you know, a buzzword, trauma-informed community. So I've been told Catherine might be able to take a stab at that.
I'll give it a shot. So when I go out and I do presentations on trauma and trauma awareness, I always start with this slide that is a chihuahua, small chihuahua with these huge glasses that are like Coke bottle glasses with bifocals. And the reason I do that is because it really is looking at the world with a new set of lenses. So everything that you learned up there in terms of the prevalence of trauma, how trauma impacts the body, how trauma comes out in children, those are all important pieces to incorporate into thinking about how does my environment now become trauma informed, whether I'm a school or whether I'm a treatment agency, whether I'm a youth service agency. How do I think about policy in a different way? For example, in school, how do I think about a discipline policy in a way that is trauma sensitive, in a way that a child is not pulled out of the classroom by a security guard because they're acting out, but they're really brought to a corner to learn how to self-regulate. Maybe they have some sensory objects that they can use. Maybe there's a counselor that they can go and see, so that they have opportunities to build relationships, because we know from the film and from all the research that's done that a consistent, caring adult in a child's life is one of the most important preventions for trauma, one of the most important interventions when trauma happens to a child, to try to heal that child. so that there's opportunities for caring relationships, there's opportunities for children to succeed and to feel competent, to be able to, as I'm going to back up a little bit, to be able to be screened so that people know that when a child's acting out, it's not maybe because they have attention deficit disorder, or they're oppositional, or they're just trying to piss you off and get under your skin. It could be that their brain and their nervous system is actually very different from those of children who have not been traumatized. And so then our work, even though we may not get the pay for it, our work then is really to become a brain surgeon and to try to sculpt that child's brain in a different way through the way we interact with that child, through our relationships, through building safety into our environments, through, again, opportunities for that child to learn to regulate their emotions and their behaviors and to be sensitive to the world around them.
That's great.
So,
become a brain surgeon.
become a brain surgeon.
All right. Well,
Sculpt
that's
that
great.
brain.
You know, Trudi, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing, you know, to address this within the community. And
Sure, that's a big one. There's a lot.
I know.
I think
in like 5 seconds.
Sure,
No,
yeah.
kidding. It'll take as long as.
exactly. I think the most important thing that that I'm kind of that we've been transitioning to is really adopting a way of working with schools and organizations that steps away from the traditional professional development training where you kind of walk in, you give the training, and you leave, and it's like, all right, good luck. But really adopting coaching as a practice to work with people over a longer period of time, to help them build the skills, to answer the questions, to give them strategies, to kind of brainstorm with them around what's working and what's not working and why. And also to provide the support to the adults that they're going to need to do this work, because it's great. We can watch a film, we can read a book. That doesn't mean that we're equipped and have the patience and can deal with our own stuff to be able to do this work. So what we're really trying to do is develop the relationships. My work is really with older adolescents, so I'm looking at high school age adolescents and teachers who are working with students in high school to really find opportunities to move teachers and youth development workers who are working in schools and really look not just at the relationships between the students and teachers, but the social environment. How can we make conditions or modifications to the social environment to build the resiliency? There is no bigger, I believe, that there's no bigger opportunity for prevention than a great school. And if students feel connected to the school and feel connected to the people in the school, not just the adults, but the other students, and feel like everyone is kind of in their corner and rooting for them, even when they've kind of given up on themselves, that is one of the biggest investments that we can make and the biggest bang for our buck in terms of prevention. So particularly around, my work right now is really looking at advisory programs and how we can kind of use that opportunity that we have to build those relationships between teacher advisors and students. So we have a lot of opportunities to really support. Teachers need the support. The work can't live in us, like in the experts and the youth development people and the psychologists, and I'm a PhD candidate in social psychology. We can't hold the expertise anymore. We have to kind of work with teachers and youth development workers to transfer that to them so that they can do the work that they need to do.
That sounds great. And your words were, no greater opportunity for prevention is a great school. So that's wonderful. And come to New Haven.
Yes,
okay,
I'd be happy to come to New Haven.
We'll definitely come. Brother Kelvin, I was wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the work you're doing.
Great. How many of us have ever heard the advertisement on television? It's 3 o'clock. Do you know your child? Raise your hand. It's a pretty good number. I was actually part of the group that helped put that message together a long time ago. There was another message actually that sort of resonated as well. It was a little bit longer. And it went this way. What happens between 3 to 8 affects what goes on from 8 to 3. And so most of my work for the last 25 years, just about, has been in after-school programming. And, my mother used to say, what good is it to take a bath if you're going to put back on the same old dirty clothes? She was practical like that. And so what we found is that while we're doing a lot of great work in schools and to develop our professionals and our teachers and so forth, these children still have to go back to communities. They have to go back to homes. They have to go back to environments in which they actually still experience these adverse childhood experiences. And so most of my work has been dealing with environment and environmental change. And how do we change community? How do we get parents and relatives, store owners, churches, just adults in our community to make sure that our environment is changing? And I think that while again we do a lot of great training and so forth, it's what happens when we go home. It's what happens when we leave the classroom, when we leave our agencies, and these children have to go back to that particular community that really makes the impact. So that's what the greatest part of my work has been.
Wow. Thank you. I love that image. Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing in some schools, work that you have over the years?
Sure. What we're trying to do to partner with Kelvin and partner with Trudi is we're trying to build that environment into the school. So I've been very fortunate over 25 years to work in both what I call an access district schools, where there's access to financial resources, and also in urban schools, about half and half. And one of the things I noticed in urban schools is they're often about punitive control, whereas access district schools are more about education. And part of building a better environment in an urban school is building in things like trauma-informed practice. I can't tell you how many times as a young teacher I was told, be really, really hard in the first 3 months, and then you could smooth out the rest of the year. But I found that not to be true. What I found to be true is if I want a punitively controlled classroom, then maybe that's the way to go. But if I really want to have a classroom focused on education, the first 3 months should be built on building authentic relationships. And once the authentic relationship is built between administrator, teacher, and student, now you have an environment, speaking to Kelvin's point, where learning can take place. For instance, if you don't reach a child, you can't teach a child. So our focus is now in building a school that is founded on relationship and whole child-centered education so that true learning can take place. That's kind of where the trauma-informed piece comes into. We're building that into the teacher training. So we have teachers being trained in trauma-informed practice, cultural competency, and the skill, because as Trudi mentioned, it's not easy always to build a relationship. It takes training and skill in order to build that mindset into a school.
And I think Trudy's point was well taken around that it's an ongoing coaching relationship.
Right.
Yeah,
It's not just a
absolutely.
one and done kind of like, oh yeah, you took that PD and you're done.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
that's great. Sandy, I'm going to ask you, you've seen sort of from a national level people who have been attempting this. Like, what are the barriers to this?
So I think a good start is to go back to the bathroom actually and give us the background about that. I'm a school-based person, so I'm a school psychologist by training, so all of my research is school-based research. Alice comes very strongly on the community end, right? So that first initial bathroom conversation has led to many subsequent conversations around language, right? So I'm looking around the room and I'm thinking, this is so amazing. Look at all the people that are here that are interested in this topic. But we all come at it from very different training, background experiences, understanding, settings, context, you name it. And so part of the big struggle is around developing that common language to understand what are we talking about when we say the word trauma or whole child. I was going to expand on that because trauma is one piece of what we're looking at in a whole child perspective to what we're doing. We're looking for, across domains of child functioning, the physical health, social, emotional, behavioral, academic when we're focused in schools. So just to go back on that, I think one of the biggest barriers is to stop and take the time. So great that we're here today and great that we're all talking about things, but go a little deeper to then define what we mean and to establish the common vision of where we're going. So to me, I think that's a really big thing, particularly on the school-based side, again, because I'm from the school-based focus, where we have a lot of other demands that are going on and a lot of different things that we need to be trained to do, and we're not necessarily skilled at partnering super effectively with communities, but we want to, right? It's not that we don't want to, it's just, again, this establishing what are we all here to do and how are we going to do this in a common way.
Great. Yeah. Time.
Well, there are a lot of
Time issue.
challenges, right.
Tim, you want to add anything to that? Or?
There's really two barriers that I could identify in a public school setting, having been in a public school environment for a long time, and you just mentioned time. There's a collective bargaining agreement that allows for so much training time, and there's so many initiatives that principals and district administrators place upon the school. And if you have your priority as trauma-informed practice, then you have to have a supervisor who protects you and covers you in that practice and believes in it also, and you have to provide the time amid all the other initiatives. And there's also teachers been in districts for a long time that are like, it's just another initiative, it's just coming down the pike. And if I weather this one for 2 years, then in the next 2 years it'll be a different initiative. But if you're really dedicated to working with children and addressing adverse childhood experiences, then all those pieces have to come together. The union has to agree, your supervisor has to agree, it has to be a high priority, the principal, and more education like this has to get out to the district. And then together, I think, you can overcome that barrier. And then the other piece, I think, is just human mindset, because a lot of people feel like, you know, I lived through a tough circumstance, I made it out, I picked myself up by my bootstraps, this child can too. And remember, when you're in a system that really looks at punitive control as its model of behavior management, you can tend to escalate a situation real quick with a student and think that you're in the right. So there has to be a lot of training around mindset for teachers, so that, and administrators, so they can build a school system that truly looks at adverse childhood experience for what it is and is able to train staff and themselves to truly overcome that barrier.
I mean, I think kindness and compassion are key elements, and very hard to do when you've got deliverables.
That's right.
You know, it's even hard to do when you have therapists who have to do 30 sessions a week. You know, it's keeping that alive inside yourself and trying to inspire it in others is very difficult. I was wondering, Brother Kelvin, if you could talk a little bit around what are some creative ways you've seen the cycle being disrupted, you know?
So I think, along with Catherine, this goes back almost 20 years where, you know, we had one of the first school community partnerships at Weaver High School, which was called Neighborhood Bridges. We were just discussing that. And, you know, we kept the school building open until 8 p.m. In the evening, and using the building as a place for community development, for family support, to give children something to do after school, but it also helped to create community. And so while we talk about ACEs, I'm looking here, you know, ACE, we probably should also talk about AAE, meaning adult adverse experiences, because many a times we see parents just doing what was done to them or what they have learned, and you know, in the spiritual or religious world, we might call it a generational curse. Well, it's not so much that it's a generational curse. You're doing what your mother did to you, and she did to you what her mother did to her, and so it's passed down in terms of these types of experiences. Amazingly enough, when I was talking to my wife about this and how I think the study is great, but it is something that I've lived with all of my life at age 50 now. And I know that my mother lived with it, and she's age 70 plus now. And I know that so, you know, it's great that the study is here, but, you know, we really have to look at the fact that many of us have already survived this thing. And that's where the real study, you know, started. And so for me, today I'm looking at some stuff out of Yale where they deal with emotional intelligence. Right. And so, you know, I look at this thing about EQ over IQ, and that, you know, our children are coming to school with low emotional quotients. Well, the emotional quotient is low because of these adverse experiences. But we find that when you can raise the emotional quotient of a child, automatically that reading, writing, and arithmetic will come up also.
That's great. That's, yeah, exactly. And Trudi, I don't know if you want to talk about what you see some of the disruptions to the cycle in your work.
Yeah, so I think the biggest disruption is people, is relationships with adults who care, right? I think that sounds like such a simple thing to say, but it's hard to come by. When kids have people who aren't related to them, who are in their corner, who believe in them, who are available to them, and who don't treat them like, you know, a sad story, you know, like who just really honor them. I'll just kind of use one of my own personal example. So I was a teen parent. I dropped out of Buckley High School in 1997. And at that time, the teen pregnancy rate in Hartford was super high. It was like close to 20%. This was like, like late 90s. So me and a bunch of my friends actually had kids. And when I was in a teen pregnancy or teen mom program, and the woman who was the case manager in that program and the program director treated us like teenagers, like regular people. Like she took us to movies, and she took us to poetry readings, and she took us to colleges, on college tours, which was not anything that anyone was doing with teen moms. Sure, she also talked to us about childhood, like all of the other things that you have to learn when you're taking care of, when you have babies. But she also did all of the other stuff. And when I look back now at the women who were in that program with me, I mean, we have done amazing things. Most of us have gone to college. A couple of us are business owners. Many of us own homes. We now I have 2 children in college. And so do, a bunch of my friends are getting ready to send their children to college. But it's because we had people who didn't just treat us like, oh, you're only now a mom. And so, to kind of talk about now when we have people, adults who treat students like, well, your life is over because, you got this, case, you caught this case, or you had this thing happen to you, or you can't read, you know what I mean? Like and we do that like that because we're like, oh, poor thing, we have to have a vision for our kids' lives that's bigger than the one that they have for themselves. We have to have that. And when we can hold that for them and treat them as though that is their destiny, they will rise. And that's hard.
Wow. There you go. There you go. That's breaking the cycle. So I'm conscious we have 5 minutes, and there are a couple other questions, but do you mind if we kind of just move to asking if there's any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask or run through? Yes, sir.
I just wanted to ask, Ms. Lebron.
Trudi, yeah.
What has been one of the greatest interests or the greatest inhibitions for teachers to be a part of your program? So I heard you said you go to PDs for
Sure.
teachers. Have there been a great interest, or has there been a lack of interest there?
Interest, that's a tricky question. I feel like people are interested in learning. I think that the level from all of the research that I've done and all of the work that I've done over the last 15 years that I've been working, in schools, I think the most difficult part is getting decision makers to be able to make the investment in time and the financial investment that it's going to take to actually bring people through this work, because it's not a one-day training, So, and then it's about getting the right people there. So, for example, in a coaching relationship, you don't coach 50 people. You work with, 7, and it's a time-intensive process, and you support those 7 or however many in becoming the leaders in their environment so that they can teach, kind of move the work forward. So the biggest barriers are time and, just the ability to fund the work.
Yes, sir.
I hope this will not come as a stupid question, but
No.
All of you had mentioned that one of the key things is caring. How do you systemize caring if it's for pay? And if someone cares, they care whether they're paid or not. And if they don't care when they're paid, they don't care. How do we systemize this at scale that would actually make a difference? It sounds like you guys are treating 6,000 kids, but they're 21,000. Hartford has 20, 30,000, whatever. How do we do that would actually make a difference? How do we create care in a community?
I just want to say that I don't think anybody went into the teaching world or mental health world or in the human service field without having a little bit of caring, you know, at the beginning. I mean, I could be wrong, but you know, that there. The question is, how does it not get squelched? Yeah. But you guys.
Or how do you teach it? So Kelvin talked about the cycle of intergenerational spaces. If you haven't been in a generation or in a context where you're taught how do you reframe the way you're interacting, then that's care, right?
Yeah.
That's what you focus on.
Yeah, I have a, yeah. So this is what I often say to the people that I work with. You can work at it two ways. You can try to change people's hearts, which is hard, or you can try to change people's minds. The way you change people's minds is you put policies in place that require people to deal with things differently. If you have, and Tim, you know, touched on, like, if you have supervisors and policies that say this is how we deal with this scenario, we don't suspend a kid, we don't send security to go and remove them, it's against the policy, this is how we deal with it. I am less interested in changing the heart if you believe whether or not that's how we should do it. No, that's how we're going to do it. So, you know, I want everyone to care, you know, and sometimes when that's not working, we have to create the policies and the procedures that kind of move us closer to the way that we should be behaving.
I'm excited to have Trudi on my board at Community First School and Kelvin supporting, because we're trying to create a space. I mean, that's really the idea, create a space where this can happen, and then that can affect policy. So for instance, we have one social worker for every grade level instead of one social worker for the school. And the purpose is to build that kind of support and team teaching, and so that the social emotional needs of kids can be met and that they can be cared for. And then as a model is successful, it can become something that is transferred into other district schools as well.
You know, Catherine or Kelvin?
Yeah, I also wanted to jump back to what was in the film about when you make that shift from the question of what's wrong with you to what happened to you, that's an empathic shift. Yep. That shift does go a little bit to here, because now you're looking at that child in a different way. Again, not that this child is trying to get at me or get under my skin or make my job difficult, but it's that, wow, he's doing the best he can right now because of what has happened to him, and because his brain has changed, his heart rate has changed, his nervous system is different. Now I have some information to work with that helps me to think a little bit differently and feel bad. Because if the child were in with a broken leg that was very visible, you would have a different, you know, you would help him get to the classroom, sit down in the chair, get up and down the stairs. It's the same thing with traumatized kids. We just can't see it that way until we get that information.
Okay, so just very quickly, this will be a radical type of answer for you, right? But
it wasn't you got a lot of people. It was
so
a good
very quickly, right? But you know, I look at the educational system of Hartford, right? And so this is where our children are located, okay? And I say, you know, what if we had our educators, who I believe love our children, to educate, what if we had them live in our community? That would be a different Hartford, and that would be a different level of caring as well. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah. We have time for like one more question.
We have a young student.
How would you go about dealing with the subject of repressed or suppressed thoughts or emotions or memories within the youth?
I think that I think that.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How do you deal with when repressed thoughts or memories sort of come up? You know, both within I assume like within a school system or anywhere.
I'd say school system in general also.
Yeah, I think that one of the most important things is that this kind of work needs to be tiered, right? So like you have prevention work and sort of ongoing education, and then you have the folks in the school who can, you know, sort of walk with you through your memories, through your experiences, who are not afraid to talk about the bad things that have happened, who are able to sort of work with you on that. And you know, our schools don't have those kinds of mental health people sort of just hanging around. You know, a lot of the special ed psychologists or social workers are really busy with IEPs and things like that. So I think we need to increase the resources to be able to have folks in the school who could be with you around that. Because you're exactly right. I'm raising 3 kids who came through the system, right? And the triggering that happens is just constant and always. And so, where's the safe space in school to be able to go and kind of just pull yourself together again? People understanding that and explaining to others, so you don't have to always be the person explaining. So, I don't think we have those resources, but I think it sounds like, at least in Hartford, that folks are really working on doing that. Is that answer enough?
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll do one more. Yeah.
Just a closing question, and maybe this goes to our friends at Achieve Hartford as well as folks on the panel, is who's going to lead this? I think people are charged up and want to know how to make this happen in Hartford, because it sounds like it's happening in New Haven. Enough. I mean, some, always more, always could do more, but.
Can you talk a bit about what is happening in New Haven?
The New Haven Travel Coalition?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happened, I'll be frank with you. We got called, Clifford Beers is sort of the next region over from Newtown, right? So the shooting happened in Newtown. We got called in, and we were asked by the commissioner of DCF to be the recovery in the Sandy Hook school, right? And so we've been there since January of that next year, right? And I called every clinical person from Katrina to combat. I said, what do we do? Because we have no idea what to do in a school where this kind of adversity happened. And everyone said, there's no book, there's no thing you can take off of, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, thanks a lot. So over the first year, we had to really fumble and figure and find. But what we did was this surveillance model, right? Because the event happened in the school, so everyone who was there, either they were there or not there, but they kind of were within relationship to the event. And that really changed our perspective. The other perspective that got changed in our work in Newtown was that the teachers were victims also. And so we had a full-time clinician just for the teachers. And that was revolutionary because, we've gone in and done PD, but we never would touch, like, your personal life. Now, then we, all of a sudden, we were, treating the staff too. And so we tried to, what happened was some then dollars floated down because, my clinicians, everyone, we circled up the week after the event, and everyone said, well, for goodness sake, we respect the response that's happening in Newtown, but for goodness sake, this stuff happens every day to our kids. Yes, we had a dead body being left outside of school for a whole morning while kids were just walking by. So what are we going to do in New Haven? And the mayor pulled it together. And so what we've been doing in New Haven is trying to translate what we learned in Newtown about the whole school approach and the tiered and working with parents, working with kids, working with the teachers, and working with the community. So it's not just kid-focused, And so that, we got some dollars that came down from the legislation, not a lot. A third of the dollars go to after-school programs or during-school programs, and then the rest go to coaching, maybe coaching, after we meet, but to professional development, and then some clinical services, and then we have a couple other funders who are funding some of the tier 3 services. But the mayor will say the city is a trauma-informed city, and I'll be honest with you, we had a death. A 14-year-old young man was killed last week.
That's right.
And she has had about 5 different table meetings with folks in the community. There's a press conference at 12:30, and we're a little more prepared because there's a lot of community involvement in the schools now. We've really been able to pull resources in, so that's been helpful. But so, yeah.
So I think as part of that work, though, Alice, I think you talk about how you pulled together all those partners, so you have a coalition that is jointly led.
Yeah, I think that, the city of New Haven, it's the United Way, Clifford Beers, and the public school system. Trudi?
Yeah, I want to respond. So this is everyone's work, right? This is everybody's work. And we've been talking a lot about responses to trauma, things that we can do in the communities and things that we can do in schools. And I also want to make sure that we address that, like, the reason that we need this type of response is because we also need to be dealing with the reason why trauma is so prevalent in our communities, and this is really about class and race and structural racism and poverty and all of these kinds of things. Like, this is, we need to be dealing with that stuff because that is the foundation for why we need to be figuring this out. So at the same time as we're doing this work, we need to be addressing all of those other issues.
Structural racism.
Right, so it's the lens of trauma-informed practice and the lens of race equity need to be linked. Like, it's like one lens on this side and one lens on this side. Because, you just said it, what happened in Sandy Hook was terrible, and then there was a phone call, and we're kind of like, well, wait, this is not new. Like, this happens all the time. So we need to remember that this work can't happen in isolation because we won't solve it. This is all just how to make kids more resilient. We need to be talking about, like, how do we prevent some of these things from happening?
Yeah, 14-year-olds with guns.
Well, and so that's part of my answer to the gentleman's question, because as long as we have two Hartfords, a Hartford that is steeped in poverty, steeped in the suffering of institutional racism, but we have another Hartford being built just downtown in the back. I was down there the other day. I'm like, good grief, they're building another Hartford back here. And so we have to really take a look at how our small city of 18 square miles is being developed. And that it is our city. All of us who come here to work, who educate here, who are being educated here, who are raising children, all of us have to be at that table for some positive outcomes.
And there are two New Havens too.
Yeah, for sure.
But you're right. There's an amazing woman who started the Community Healing Network, Enola Aird, and she's bringing folks of African descent together to look at what's the life impact of 400 years or plus of slavery.
There we go.
And she has been doing an amazing work in the community. She's very dedicated, and I would highly recommend bringing her in to speak because they're doing work in New Haven, Baltimore, and two towns in California. But it's about building that community.
Yeah.
I think the last thing that you said it like 6 times, I just want to raise it up. It's in the best interest of our society that this problem does not stay within the quote-unquote experts. This is not we are never going to be able to fix it unless everyone is on board. And ma'am, you have the last word.
I actually just wanted to name the person that you had raised in the Community Healing Network.
Enola Aird, A-I-R-D. And they have a beautiful website so you could go on. But she's been doing some really important work. Aird, A-I-R-D.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, and we'll be questions.
Thank you. I'm just going to answer Roxana's question directly because I think that we're so used to asking that question that way, which is like, all right, so who's going to do this? We screen this film to try to find out who wants to do something, right? And that's why these cards are important. Because when we wait for someone else or the experts or whoever's getting the funding to just do it, 2 things happen. 1, a lot of people don't get involved. And 2, the people that do it usually do it wrong. So we are really looking at the community very differently going forward and saying, who wants to do something about this? Let's talk. All of us are going to start meeting to talk about what Hartford can really start doing about this, but we're trying to find out on the ground. And we know that there are a lot of folks, grassroots parents in the North Hartford as well, that are looking at what can happen in North Hartford schools in particular, with both lenses, treatment and also how do we avoid those problems in the first place. And so we're excited to really start bringing people together around this, but we also know that we have to find people who are hungry to lead this work. It is not about Achieve Hartford, getting a small grant and then all of a sudden like 10 people who don't live in Hartford probably, you know, work on this.
If you call me, I'll refuse to come.
That's not what I meant. So fill out these cards and we'll collect them at the end. And last comment, please. Please.
A lot of resources within Hartford.
Yes.
We have the ability. I'm a retired social worker with lots of experience, and so what we need to do is stop looking at Hartford as a problem to solve. We need to look at Hartford as a community with assets that we need to cultivate and build up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's end on that note. We will be in touch. Please leave your card on the way out. And thank you for all the questions and for the panel.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.